Hey, how you doing? This is RJ. Today, I'm going to rant. And I'm going to do so because I ran across this podcast on the Marvel website, and it showed me that really these quote-unquote progressive people who control the comic industry, and I would say control the entertainment industry as a whole, they're not ignorant, they're not misled, and they're not acting this way and believing these things simply because it's the only thing that they know. No, far from that. It's that they are quite deliberately, maliciously holding on to these views. In a way that I can only describe, after having heard this podcast, only in a way that I can describe as evil. Now, I know that's a harsh term, so let's define our terms here. I define evil as your traditional Western society defines evil. Evil is not a thing in itself. Evil is a state. It is a state of turning away from what is good. And if you're a Christian, that has a very specific meaning. And even if you're not, it has a meaning to you because it is the basis of much of our justice system and all of the other systems that we use as a civilization. The base ideas are from the book of Genesis that everything was created was good. Therefore, evil is not a thing. It was not created. It is simply a state of turning away from what is good. It is simply a state of turning away from what is. Turning away from reality. And if you turn away from reality, what is left? What do you turn towards? Well, of course, going back to that book once again, everything was created out of nothing, ex nihilo. So when you turn away from what is, when you turn away from reality, you turn towards that void of nothingness, that nihilism once again. And as I said, these people, these quote-unquote progressives, they are driving straight towards this nothingness. That's what they wish to embrace. They wish to flee from everything that is real, and just embrace nothingness. And they do so in a deliberate, willful manner, and not only for themselves, but they wish to drag you and me and everyone else kicking and screaming off of that cliff into nothingness, into nihilism with them. And you don't have to believe the sources from where these things come from to understand the very basic concept of what is good, that reality is good, that what you see around you has value. But for these people, it has no value, and they will try and twist it and destroy it and get rid of it at every turn. And the thing is that one of the reasons why I look at the comic industry in the way that I do, I think of it as a microcosm of the entertainment industry as a whole, because it's really difficult to put these things together to look at the bigger picture of the entire entertainment industry and make a cohesive argument. But if you look at this small part of the industry and use it as a microcosm, as a reflection of that bigger industry, you can see exactly what is going on. And I concentrate on Marvel because Marvel is the mouthpiece of this industry. So let me back up a little bit and tell you where I came to this realization. Well, first of all, you should probably know that I had this certainly in the back of my mind all the time, but I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. But really, I don't think I'm going to give these people the benefit of the doubt anymore, not after what I have heard today. So Marvel puts out podcasts, some of them on a weekly basis. And I was poking around the Marvel website like I usually do, and I ran across a new podcast that was This Week in Marvel. And I thought to myself, okay, that came out on the 4th. Now, the entire comic industry is in shambles. It is shut down. Like the rest of the nation, all the comic shops are shut down. Their shipping companies are all shut down. And the company itself has told its creative people to put their pencils down. So how in the world can they have a show saying This Week in Marvel when all of this is going on and everything is shut down? Because what they do in this show is concentrate on comics, and there are no new comics. So I had to click on this thing to see what was going on. Now, first of all, what they were doing in this podcast was promoting Marvel Unlimited, which is the Marvel version where you go online and pay to look at comics and read them digitally. But the interesting thing was that they were trying to push people towards one very specific genre of comics, and that was these teen comics, these older teen comics. And they were doing it for a very specific reason. And that reason was the fact that they have a lot of comics that were already scheduled to come out at this time, and they still plan for them to come out. And all of these comics are centered around this event called Outlawed, where you have all of these younger heroes. Anybody below the age of 21 can't be a superhero anymore unless they have a mentor. And all of these other titles are supposed to come out of that. But these titles include the Champions, the new Power Pack comic, the new Warriors comic, and the new Children of the Atom comic. And the thing is that all of these comics either look completely horrible, the people working on them look like they have zero talent, and they all have done poorly in the past. Now, if you look at Champions itself, it has been canceled twice already. This is a very progressive book, and they've tried to push it again and again, and it keeps on getting canceled because no one wants to buy it. And yet, they're rebooting it a third time. If you look at Power Pack, now Power Pack was an older comic from the 80s, and they tried to reboot it a little while ago, and they're trying again, and I thought they might have some success until I realized who is writing this thing. It is Ryan North. Ryan North is the man who really created the current Squirrel Girl and was the one who worked on that book most for its entire run. And this book was just pitiful, especially in its sales. No one was buying this, and no one was even ordering this book. But it was a very progressive book, and so they kept it going. They just kept shoving it out there, even though no one wanted it. So if he's writing this new Power Pack book, I can tell you right now, it's going to flop. And of course, you all probably know about the new version of the New Warriors. It is infamous by this point. Even though it hasn't even come out yet, it looks so cringeworthy, so awful, so progressive. And yet, they still want to put this out. And besides that, there is the Children of the Atom. And this is all simply older characters that have been race and gender swapped. So again, you have your very progressive book. And of course, they're able to gender and race swap all of these characters because they're all white or male characters, and race swapping is quite alright when that is the case. But my first point is that the comic industry is in shambles and is shut down. And yet, they are still planning, when things open up again, to take all of these progressive books that they know are not going to sell and put them out there. It appears that they are going to be the first thing on the shelf when the comic shops reopen. Now, I know that these things are probably half-written by now, but they have taken half-written stuff over the last year or two and simply canceled it and said, no, we're not even going to publish what you have. It's just canceled before it even begins. So they have done that, but they are not doing this with these 4 titles. Now the first question becomes, if their industry is in shambles, why in the world would they do such a thing? Well, I think there's a little hint to answer that question in this podcast itself. Within the podcast, around 10 minutes of this hour podcast, you have the 2 hosts of this podcast trying to sell you a Marvel credit card. And they go through their whole spiel along with the terms and conditions at the end. So they're pushing other products, and those other products are where they make their money. And therefore, they don't care whether these comics make money, because that's not the point of the comics. The comics are there to push this progressive agenda, and they will be there after all of this is over, when the industry is nothing but broken pieces, and they will still be pushing these things out. But the second and more important point is the fact that what I see going on here, especially after listening to this podcast, is the fact that what Marvel is attempting to do with all of these teenage heroes is trying to beat DC to the punch with its 5G. Because DC Comics, with their 5G reboot, was supposed to take all of their older heroes and retire them and replace them with newer, younger versions of the same heroes. So I really believe that Marvel is trying to do the exact same thing, because Marvel has tried to reboot itself with new characters, new progressive characters, and it has failed at least twice now. I do believe this will be their 3rd attempt to try to get rid of all of those older heroes and replace them with all of these young, progressive characters. The new Children of the Atom will replace the X-Men, the new Warriors will replace the old New Warriors, and the Champions are supposed to replace the Avengers. And this replacement is key, because it shows that these people who run Marvel Comics truly believe that these characters are heroes. The majority of comic readers do not see these characters as heroes. Not at all. But Marvel indeed sees them as heroes, heroes that can replace the old heroes and surpass them because, again, of their progressive ideological mindset. So I want to springboard off of Children of the Atom, which is the new X-Men teen book, and talk about the X-Men themselves just for a minute or two. Now, I did so in my last video, and I'll link that at the end if you want to hear me go into more detail about it. Now, these characters, these X-Men characters today, they're not heroes. They are straight up villains. They are racist, segregationists who do things that only villains would do. They have taken all of their race of mutants and grouping them all together, whether they be called villains or whether they be called heroes, because they're all the same under their racial characteristic of having power. And that's all that matters to them. They've even created a team specifically of these villainous characters in order to give them the leeway and the freedom to explore their personalities and their powers to the extent, as they say in the book, that carnage can be used as therapy. These are not the actions of heroes. These are the actions of villains. These new X-Men have also taken to stealing other people's children who are mutants, therefore of the same race as them. They are taking them by force away from their parents, even if they don't want to be there. Because, of course, they are of the same race. And therefore the X-Men believe that since these children are of the same race as them, these children belong with their own race. And therefore they have the right to take them away. Again, these are not the actions of a hero. These are the actions of a villain. Another example would be the fact that once they take these people, even forcibly, and put them on this island where they live in their own little society with their own race, if they do not wish to be there and time again violate the rules, what do? Do they let them go? No, they don't. Even though they forcefully took them there to begin with, if they don't want to be there and don't follow the rules, they will imprison you instead of let you go. Once again, not the actions of heroes, the actions of villains. And I saved the best for last. If you are a member of this race, and this race is distinguished by power, of course, because for your progressives, everything boils down to power. So for this race, you are distinguished as part of this race by having power. If you, for some reason, lose your power, what do? Well, they sentence you to death. And, by the way, they don't try to hide their murder in a little corner and call it euthanasia. No, they take you as an unpowered individual and put you in a gladiatorial ring with a powered individual that will then slaughter you. And they do this for the entertainment of the other people on the island. And, by the way, they have no qualms with this life and death situation because life has no meaning to them whatsoever. And the reason for that, in story, is the fact that they can easily create a plant-based clone of you and then implant your memories into the clone, so that is you living on. So they have no qualms with killing the person in front of them because they can create a clone that will have the exact same memories. This is a total disregard for life, and certainly the sanctity of life if you believe in that. And by the way, I just want to bring this up. I don't know if anyone else has, but this is the exact same plot as the invasion of the Body Snatchers from 1979. But in 1979, when this happened in the movie, this was a horror movie. But today, apparently, according to Marvel, these are the actions of heroes. But I'm here to tell you, again and again, these are not the actions of actual heroes. They are the actions of villains. And all of these X-Men, all of these mutants are being led, and were led to this place by Professor Xavier. And they indeed put him on the pedestal as a hero as well. Now I get to the point that really drove me insane when I listened to this podcast. I'm going to read a couple of little excerpts from this podcast when these two hosts are talking about Charles Xavier, the creator of the X-Men, in the story itself. So they start off by describing the X-Men as follows. They say, the X-Men really remained unique because they were born mutants. They're persecuted, they're feared, and I think that goes with the teen experience, feeling very other and feeling very vulnerable. But then the two of them go on to talk a little more about Charles Xavier and say the following. Unfortunately, it's teens being told to fight adults by a bald guy who creeps in their brains all the time. And then the other host says, yeah, Charles Xavier is definitely a heel. And then a few minutes later, they bring back Charles Xavier as they talk about a secondary generation of mutants known as the New Mutants. And the conversation goes as follows. You have the Hellions, who were the New Mutants' rival at the time. They're another teen team of mutants who attend Emma Frost's Massachusetts school. Unfortunately, the entire team was slaughtered brutally in the early 1990s. So that was the male host, and then the female host replies this way. She says, you know what's really funny? You think of Emma Frost as kind of being a jerk for starting this school, and she's essentially doing the exact same things Charles Xavier has been doing forever. It's just that she is a little bit more forward with the fact that she's terrible. The male host then goes on to say, look, I'm a big Emma Frost fan. And you know what? Emma just wanted to help train kids. Look, Emma versus Charles, I'm Team Emma all the way. And then the female host continues and says, listen, it's like, who's the least worst? Which, in that case, if it's between Charles and Emma, I would go Emma. Because Emma, at least, she's not two-facing it. That's why he's got that bald head. Because there's another face on the back of his head that's like, I fight children for fun. The other host replies, yes, like Voldemort style. And the female host replies, yeah, you got it. Now, this may seem like a simple little conversation to you, and it may not mean a whole lot. But if you dig down into what they're talking about, this shows exactly why these people are so twisted. You see, their description of the X-Men is that they were persecuted because they were born different and they were feared and persecuted, and they have to go through this experience, and that's what makes them heroes. That's their entire mindset. And they have to take all of the history of the X-Men and either alter it or downplay it or get rid of it somehow in order to prove that this was always the case, because in the actual history of the story, this is not the case. It may have been part of the characters from the very beginning, but it is certainly not the central point of the characters throughout most of their history. So what these two hosts are doing, first of all, is taking the character, Charles Xavier, who was the person who inspired this team to come together and gave them their purpose. They are turning him historically into a villain. Whereas he is the father of heroes and the hero himself, they are trying to villainize him at every turn. Because, as I talked about in one of my recent videos, which I'll link at the end, which is about the Hellions, in that video I went over the fact that Charles Xavier, as a person, what he was trying to do with this original story was the fact that he saw these kids. He saw these kids with these unique powers which they could not control. And so, since he had the same experience as them and learned to control his own powers, and he had the resources available to him to create this school, what he did was take in these children so that they could learn to control their powers responsibly. And once they learned to control their powers responsibly, then he showed them the fact that since they were given these powers, this was indeed a responsibility not only to protect themselves, but this responsibility should inspire within them a duty to protect the world. That's what the actual history of the X-Men looks like. But what they're trying to paint here as the history of the X-Men is the fact that Charles Xavier manipulated these children into doing his bidding because he liked to see children fight and die. And the thing is that they give Emma Frost a pass. Now, Emma Frost, at the time they're talking about in the 1990s, she was a villain, a straight-up villain. Today, she's a hero. She's supposedly a hero anyways, but back in that time, she was never even considered to be a hero. Never in any story at all. And they even admit here that she caused the brutal deaths of the children that were under her charge as students. And yet, she gets a pass. Why? Because she didn't hide the fact that she was taking these children and putting them into danger for her own selfish purposes. But Charles Xavier isn't given a pass, because he was two-faced and deceived these children into believing that they were heroes in service of a greater cause. This is his crime. His crime that he must be villainized for is the fact that he inspired true heroes, because these heroes, under his tutelage, became true heroes. They became responsible. They had a duty. They were servants of justice. They would seek to protect even the villains that attacked them. So they were heroes in the true sense of the word. And this is what must be destroyed. Because in the progressive mindset, there is no such thing as duty. There is no such thing as justice. There is no such thing as a paragon of virtue or a true hero. All of these things are simply deceptions taught to you to control you. So, because within these stories, this man, Charles Xavier, was a good man. Because he was a good man and inspired goodness, he inspired self-sacrificial ideals of heroism, justice, courage in his students. Because he did that, because he created true heroes, therefore he must be demonized. And I already knew that these creators and these people who run this comic industry, they see these new progressive quote-unquote heroes as being actual heroes. They tout them as being heroes, and they truly believe them to be heroes, even though they act in these villainous ways. But really, this little conversation, it just pulls the mask off of everything that they have said about their own history and about the heroes in the past of the universe where these characters reside. They believe that in the past, these heroes were indeed villains because they acted in a traditional heroic way. That, in their minds, makes them villains. That is to say, because these characters were actually good, they must now be villainized. And as I said at the first, this is not a mistake. This is not ignorance on their part. These people know the history of these comics. You can tell from the way that they talk about these comics, they know the actual history of these comics, but they can't let it stand as it is. They must deliberately and willfully twist it and warp it and try to destroy every notion of heroism within it. This is a deliberate turning of their backs to all that is good, and therefore they place themselves willfully in the state of evil. And, as I've said in the past, because evil can never fulfill a person, they are not content with driving themselves off of this cliff into the abyss of nihilism. No, they must twist and warp everything around them and everything that they can get their hands on until everyone else can see nothing but this evil, until you and I and everyone else is forced to turn our backs on the good as well. So, if I've given you anything new to think about, hit like, hit the shield in the lower right-hand corner of your screen to subscribe, and leave me a comment. Tell me what you think about all this. All right. I'll see you later. Bye.